Thank you, folks, and welcome back to another Pelican Bone Outdoors podcast. We're here live with my good buddy Dean. Say hello, Dean.
Hello, Dean.
This is one of my best friends who just moved back from South Dakota. Why? Oh, why would you want to deal with that kind of snow? But today we're going to be talking about fly fishing because neither one of us, by the way, are professional fly fishers. But if you watch Dean compared to me, that would and Dean's watching the live while we're recording live. Good stuff. Good stuff. But as I was saying, I suck at fly fishing. If you've seen my YouTube videos, I have two videos on the channel where I attempted to go fly fishing. I did catch a fish on one. Did I don't know, maybe both videos, but I know I only caught a fish on one. But Dean has been getting into fly fishing a lot, and he's gotten pretty good at it. Watching him cast, certainly compared to what I've been doing. So, um, dude, what you got? What got you in to fly fishing to begin with?
Yeah, that's a long question.
We
Long
got time.
answer. Yeah, I can answer that before I do any detail. I would preface to any listeners and viewers um, that I am very, 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 very new at it, and I've been so infrequent with it that I feel like every time I go out, I'm relearning it. So, my presence here and talking about fly fishing tonight is more as a desired enthusiast to actually kind of build community around it rather than to try to expel any type of wisdom or knowledge. So just take anything I say with a grain of salt. For me, it's just the old world charm of it. I I don't know. There's an aesthetic to it that I really enjoy, and it came to me at a time in my life where I was dealing with a massive amount of stress, and I didn't pursue fly fishing as a means of relieving stress. I did it just because I thought it looked fun, and it ended up being um, very, very therapeutic. Um,
Fly fishing pursued you. I
yeah,
think we could say.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah, yeah. No, I think the aesthetic, like the nostalgia of it, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Because I like doing, I mean, we got power tools all over the place, but it would be cool to carve a Piro out of some hand tools. I actually got some old hand tools that my cousin handed down to me. That was handed down to him from uncles, and like I'm talking about like 100+ year old
Mm.
tools. And I think I'm gonna carve a Piro out of it. But it's that sort of thing. I think with the nostalgia of it. But I mean, I guess it's still. I mean, I don't. Do you know when fly fishing became a thing?
No, I meant to do that before coming tonight. Try to do a little more actual like world history on it. I know it's been around for a couple hundred years at least, if not way more. Um, I'm not going to pretend like I can even guess where it was originally invented. I know that it was in the UK before it was here. Um, but no, it's, and to be honest, there's so many different variations of fly fishing now, and so many different styles and techniques that um, to pinpoint which one was first, I don't even know if I could do that. Um,
I
but
guess it's the same thing. The technology's still getting
right.
better, just like conventional fishing is.
Yeah, for sure, and that's something that that's where it gets a lot more technical and nuanced. Is even what we see today, like that kind of beautiful, picturesque solo fly cast and between two mountains and a river stream. That rod they're using in that video has so much technology nowadays packed into it that it's just it looks like the old sport, but and it is in principle, but um, it's just come such a long way. And I think that's what one of the misconceptions in fly fishing is that it's just an outdated old method. But I mean, it's lasted for so many years, and that's part of my interest of is pursuing why it's stuck. Like, why do we still fly fish when it's clearly, at least where we are, it's not the most efficient way of fishing.
Right.
One of the questions that I get is why fly fishing here? Why in South Louisiana? Um, and to be honest, I don't know that there is a good practical reason. Like even the guys that we know that guide fly fishing in the saltwater flats or redfish, people travel from around the world, from Japan and from Canada and all over the place, from the UK. They come right here to Louisiana to fly fish for reds. Um, but it's not the most effective. And so, but I think that's part of the charm. It is a method that causes you to slow down, to be a lot more immersed in what you're doing, a lot more methodical, a lot more thoughtful, not just in your spotting and your fishing, but your selection of your rod and your line and your lures and all that stuff. And there's not a lot of interchangeability with the components in fly fishing, so you're going out very intentional
So specific,
with how you're
very
using your
specific.
gear.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
guess I mean, when most people think of fly fishing, when I thought of fly fishing, it's pretty much trout in a stream of, clear mountain
Right.
stream, which, I mean, granted, I want to do that. We're going to be going up to Tennessee here in October, me and my wife, to celebrate our 15th wedding anniversary. Uh, Anniversary is actually in July, but we're going in October when the leaves are changing and all that good stuff. But that's beside the point. But we're gonna go, and I'm hopefully gonna be able to cast the line a few times in a clear mountain stream. Get the whole picturesque thing. But yeah, down here, I mean, if you're gonna cast in the bayou, that can be a little bit difficult because you got trees
Right.
and
Yeah.
and you don't exactly want to be wading out in the middle of it with 12-foot alligators swimming around. But man, the skiffs, oh, the skiffs on the those
The
saltwater
skiffs are
flats.
huge, yeah, but that's one of the misconceptions that I discovered when I got into it. I kind of went into it bullheaded, like I wanted to do this, whether it made sense or not. Um, and honestly, I think I committed to wanting to do it before I realized there was a big industry with the skiffs and the saltwater flats. I knew that I would probably end up on a bank at a pond or a lake, maybe some of the bayous and canals. But as far as and I'm actually looking at the comments, I see somebody saying it's the most efficient for trout. Uh, David Fish, I'm glad you pointed that out. I wanted to come around to that. It, fly fishing is the most efficient for some fishing. It's not the most efficient for South Louisiana. I should have stated that more clearly in the beginning. Um, but even in your smaller brook streams, your trout streams, you're still dealing with trees. You're still dealing with tight overhangs. In some areas, you're backed up to a bridge. That actually creates some of the fun in fly fishing. Is learning that there's actually more than just that classic back cast, forward cast. There's a lot of techniques for learning how to fish in what we call skinny waters. So learning how to do what's called a roll cast or a side cast to avoid trees behind us, or if you're trying to cast up under low hanging branches. All these techniques work in the bayous.
Right.
And so it's so that simple breaking that misconception. The fact is that if it swims, it can be caught with a fly rod. And so literally every species of fish in the United States and beyond right now can be caught with a fly rod. And that's what's really cool. And I might be getting too far ahead because I do want to come back to what David said about it being most efficient for trout, because that really, in explaining why it's the most efficient for trout, that helps us understand why fly fishing came to be. Well, let me explain that first, and then I'll explain why.
We'll talk about how it came to
Go
be.
ahead.
Obviously, B-side outdoors, our buddy Frank over there,
Right.
was doing some googling because this because this looks like he copied and pasted. I'm not gonna lie. It says fly fishing is believed to have first begun around the 2nd century in modern day Rome. They weren't equipped with gear powered reels or weight forward fly lines. The practice of mimicking a fly drift.
Yeah, so that ties into what David was saying as far as it being the most efficient for trout. Um, to back all the way up, like what is fly fishing? Well, it's delivering, emulating the landing of a fly on water. So classic, what we think of today in the U.S. is classic, iconic. Like look in the dictionary of American fly fishing. It's going to be what's known as like a dry fly fishing. And so it's a small fly that will land and float on top of the water and follow the drift of the river. And so your mayflies, your stoneflies, various different seasonal flies hatch, and these trout will rise and sip these flies off the surface. And so the challenge is, how do you cast something? How do you present something to fish that literally weighs as light as a feather? In our traditional bait casters and spinner reels and all that, I don't know how. I mean, I'm not
You
experiencing
can't.
that either. Yeah, so you can't cast something that literally weighs less than the line that it's attached to.
The closest thing I've got was those little poppers,
Right,
and I put it on my Ugly Stick ultralight spinning reel, and I can get it uh 5 yards maybe.
right,
If you throw a cork on the end just to get it a little bit of extra weight, and that'll float in the
right.
popper will stick a little further. You can do that, but I mean,
So
you're
there's
not casting it nowhere near what you need to.
yeah. So there's two um, reasons why the fly rod works for delivering a fly in that way. First off, it uses the weight of the line itself and not the lure. And so, if any of your viewers or listeners are not familiar with the setup of a fly rod, if you were to take the fly line off of your reel and stretch it all the way out from the reel that hits the water, it tapers, especially the last 20 feet. It's fat, 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 and heavy, and that's the part that's rolling out. And at the end of that line, where that taper ends, you've got about a 7 to 9 feet, just a clear taper monofilament. And people vary. Some people a shorter leader. Some you'll use all the way up to a 20-foot leader,
And those are
depending.
tapered too.
Tapered as well. Yeah, you can either build them to taper, or you can buy pre leaders. Monofilament is what we cut back in place as we lose a flies on that end, that what we call forwarded fly line, that when you cast, the weight of that line carries the fly out. So that's method number one. Second reason why the fly it works is that kind of that rolling motion allows the fly to just loft and gently, if you do it right,
Incorrectly.
if done correctly, which is the giant
I have
caveat.
yet to achieve that.
If you don't do it correctly, it's going to either fall and collapse into a giant pile in the water, or it's going to rock the water so hard it's going to spook the fish, which leads to another reason why it's the most efficient for trout. Trout are, from what I've been told, I have actually not been trout fishing. I went one time in South Dakota in a clear river, and I realized that moving in a fishing in a fast moving river is so radically different than anything we experience here in South Louisiana.
Yeah.
Like, it's radically different. And so I had no success. But I've been told that trout are very, very, very finicky, like very spookish, very skittish. And so if you don't deliver that perfect looking fly at exactly the right time in the exact right way and just set it down in front of these pretentious little snots, they just bolt and run. And then you lose them for the day.
Well, I
And
guess
so,
well
yeah,
here it wouldn't be as bad because you can slap the water for a
right.
bass or a
And
redfish.
that's what we're used to fishing down here. We're used to fishing for fish that like the agitation and the noise
Yeah, they
and
want
the
to go check it
disturbance.
out a lot of times.
Yeah, and so something that's fallen from a tree, and so it's I think, to break even further misconceptions, um, to think that we shouldn't be fly fishing down here. I actually think that we have a luxury. Now, the purist up north would say that it's not true fly fishing because we're not focusing on that delicate finesse. Well, you can still do
Well,
that,
who asked them?
but yeah, nobody. They're not on this podcast,
That's
so.
right.
But no, so we have the beauty. Like, for me, it's one of the luxuries I have when I'm learning, is because I can be practicing that delicate presentation, but it's still forgiving in the bayous if it does smack the water, because the bass still like it.
Yeah.
So, but it leads to another thing as far as like flies, and I'm just kind of checking in, seeing if anybody had any questions for what I've said so far. Okay. Um, every lure in fly fishing is called a fly, but they're not all flies, and so we have different fly patterns. We have grasshoppers, we have frogs, even mice, we have bumblebee flies, worm flies, crab flies, shrimp pattern flies. And every one of those I just mentioned, there's a million individual variations of those flies. And so, like a mouse fly, I think is what we would refer to as a terrestrial fly, because largemouth bass will snatch a mouse that's fallen into the water and swimming on the
I
surface.
actually just bought a bunch of mouse
Oh,
lures that
did
I
you?
can't wait to try.
Right. I would love. So I got into fly tying last winter. We were snowed in South Dakota, and I just was going nuts, and so I needed something to do, and I couldn't cast anything, so I started to tie flies, and it's one of the most awesome things. It's just incredible. But there's a mouse pattern that I want to tie that I think would be a lot of fun.
Is it a
Uh,
sinking lure or is it a
no,
this would be a
it's a dry
top
fly,
water,
yeah,
yeah.
top water. So lures, and I'm still learning this, so I can't give like the full exhaustive, but just to kind of demonstrate to people that just how many different variations of fly fishing there are. Like most of us who are ignorant of fly fishing, we think of that classic dry fly. So if you've seen the movie A River Runs Through It, that's like that classic purist, beautiful movie. I think it's late '80s, early '90s. If you weren't a kid in that time, you might find it boring, but I thought it was awesome. But there are streamers, so wet flies that go under the water and stream through the water. Um, Usually use like a sinking tip fly line because they have floating fly lines, they have sinking fly lines, shooting fly lines, and just there's so many different styles.
Oh man.
And
I'm still trying to figure out the conventional thing here. So
that's actually that's where I'm still at, and that's where and I have to be careful what all I say, because if anybody's interested in wanting to learn fly fishing, it can very quickly become overwhelming.
so this
Um,
so I want to get into fly fishing. I really do. My hesitation is I'm still trying to perfect, which you never will,
right.
the conventional side because I had no. So we were talking about this the other day, a while back. Shoot, probably a few years ago. Dean was asking me when we were going fishing for reds and stuff, what size rod do I need? What size line do I need? Me, I'm over there saying you want a medium heavy rod and like 30-pound
Right.
braid to go fish these
I
redfish.
think it was 65 pounds.
Yeah. But we the blah, 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 words are tough. But no, what I was thinking was you had to match the rod and the line
Right.
for the size of the fish, right? Now, I didn't realize this because I mean I grew up saltwater fishing. It was basically a shrimp on the bottom or a shrimp under a hook, and that's all I
Mhm.
knew. So you just put some heavy line on there. Didn't matter because the fish didn't care if they seen the line; they were just sniffing for food. They were
Mhm.
hunting off of smell and taste. So it wasn't until I really started getting into bass fishing that I realized that's not the case. The line and the rod size all depend on what size baits, what size lures you're throwing.
Right.
So I'm still getting in that, and that's a similar thing, obviously,
Yeah,
with fly fishing.
it can get very confusing with fly fishing, and only through talking to you recently do I realize that it can be just as nuanced and confusing in bait casters. But fly, it depending on where you're at and what your target species is. Um, for example, if you're doing a dry fly presentation to a trout, like a classic Montana river fishing scenario, some of those guys will use a very slow action rod because that slow action allows a wider loop and a gentler kind of cascade of that fly line down. Whereas down here, these guys who are targeting redfish or tarpon or permit or bonefish or whatever, they've got fast action, like super, and they're using a whole different style of line. They're using a heavy shooting line because they're just pinpoint accurate, and they're spot fishing and they're hitting the water hard and fast because you got to put it right in front of them in that moment, and it's all about timing. And I'm assuming that's kind of the same thing with conventional fishing, but depending on what you're doing, that's going to depend on the the action, whether it's slow, medium, or fast. It's going to determine the length of your rod. So I don't know. You have to tell me this kind of the average lengths of your conventional rods, but in fly fishing, most rods are about 9 foot. There are
but
some
not
that are like 8.5,
it ain't that.
right, and
No.
some go up to like 10 foot.
Your
But
conventional
yeah,
rod, you're looking anywhere from 6 on average between 6 and 7.6.
right,
6, 7 foot 6 inches. Most of my rods I like around the 7 foot. 7 foot. Now,
right,
if you're trying to sling it out there like on the flats, if I want to sling
right,
it out there further, then I'm gonna go with a longer rod, like a 7.6 or something,
yeah,
a 7.4. But um, if I want more accuracy, you're probably looking at around a 6 foot 6, something like that. But I
okay,
like that seven
yeah,
foot is just a nice. I don't know, I've been doing pretty good with
right.
those, so I've been sticking to them.
Yeah, and then you can really go into the weeds with the rods. And this is something I don't understand, but I love hearing guys who do understand talk about it. There's a man, Kelly Gallup. He owns Slide In Lodge in Montana. I think it's on the Madison River, and he invented this unique, funky action rod by basically realizing, and I'm probably going to get this backwards, but if you think of the rod in three sections, you've got your butt section, you got your mid, and your rod tip. He basically wanted a fast action base and tip, but a slow action mid. And somehow that does something. And I may have that backwards. It may have been a fast action mid and a slow. Um, but it was bizarre, but it worked, and it ended up pioneering a new line of rods from one of the companies. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention companies here for
I don't
brand
care.
affiliation. But yeah, and I think that's actually probably one of the things that I would really want to point out anytime we're talking about fly fishing is that even though it's an old sport, it's still a sport that's being, I don't know if I should use the word reinvented, but innovation is still going on. And I don't mean just improving upon what we already have. I mean, some of the biggest names in fly fishing right now are guys who have taken the conventional rules of fly fishing and just kind of shrugged them off. There are guys who are reinventing the wheel by taking bits of fly lines that they like, cutting it, splicing it, tying it to just get different types of action, different types of response. So Kelly Gallup, I mentioned him earlier. He engineered a couple fly lines for a company by the name of Airflow. Um, he was trying to target things like muskie and pike on a fly rod. Um, People were kind of buying sinking fly lines. It was such a new thing, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Everything at that point was just classic floating fly line. It floats on the surface of the water. And I talked to Brian at Mad River Outfitters. He mentioned that 20 years ago he might have sold one or two sinking fly lines a year. But then guys like Kelly Gallup realized, like, if we can just sink the head of that line and get it to maintain a certain depth in a water column, that'll open whole new opportunities. And so he just started cutting fly line and mending it together and found something that worked. And it not only worked so well, but it revolutionized a whole new style of fly fishing. And so
Well, that would
all of it,
open it up, imagine, to more like redfish and bass. That would be
yeah,
because you're not just. I mean, they don't bite topwater all the time.
right.
So, like it's coming up on topwater season. I can't wait 'cause I love topwater.
Uh,
But yeah, man, because they don't always sit at the top of that water column. You need to get it down in there for them to even see it.
so I haven't actually fished. I have a sinking fly line from Kelly Gallup. Had the pleasure of talking to him. And side note, one of my favorite things about the fly fishing community is a lot of the big names, the heroes. The sport is huge, but it's still small enough you can interact with these guys. So I was actually had the privilege of talking to him in person on the phone at his fly shop, and he kind of walked me through what to buy for muskie and pike in South Dakota. Never did get on muskie and pike, but I'm hoping. I don't see any reason why that sinking fly line, because it's a very heavy front end um, fly line. You cast it, you let it sink to the depth that you want, and then you start stripping line or pulling the line out. And then when you start stripping, it maintains that same depth wherever you let it sink to. I really want to try it with redfish. The only thing that I need to research, everybody's watching, you're interested in getting into fly fishing, you're not looking into something like a sinking line. I know this will be able to answer this, and I'd have to look out to them, hopefully get them on the podcast. point.
That'd be awesome.
There are lines that are specific made for tropical environments. Not so much that they're affected by salt water, it's the fact that in highly moist air, certain lines respond differently when flying through the guides of the rod.
That's
And
interesting.
so you'll have certain freshwater lines up north that they function well enough on salt water that the salt doesn't bother it. They just, once they get wet, they don't shoot through the guides. It's something about the way they react to that super tropical humid air.
Huh.
So yeah,
That's weird.
fly lines are subject to that. So if you're shopping for fly lines and you see saltwater fly lines, that's not a gimmick. That's a scientific thing. So
It is a thing.
yeah, it is a
And they're
thing.
probably more expensive.
I don't know actually. They might be, but they might not be. I mean, all fly lines, and this is one of the areas that stay people from getting onto the sport. Fly lines are expensive.
Why everything is expensive.
Well, yes. I want to say that's one of the misconceptions, but it is a fact that there is an initial sting of purchase when it comes to getting into fly fishing. And the good thing is it's a big initial purchase, and once you get in the door, you're pretty good. So, for example, a good fly line on the lower end of a good fly line, you're going to pay about 60. But most good fly lines are going to be between 80 and $100, maybe 120. But ideally, the fly line itself, not the monofilament that's tied off to the end, your fly line, if cared for properly and stored and cleaned and taken care of, will last, I don't know, decades, if
Oh,
not.
really?
Yeah. I mean, so it's not like the way we swap out monofilament every season. Like, no, guys are using the same fly line for years and years and years. So,
it was an initial cost, but
it's an initial cost. So, I mean, for anybody who's interested, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if you're considering getting into fly fishing, I would say
You can call Dean at 504
Yeah.
555.
I would say you need to be willing to spend about $400.
Holy,
I think if you can now, you can get on the water with a fully spooled operational fly rod and reel with line for under 200. But
like Cabela's or Bass Pro, they usually have like those little
yeah,
things.
Orvis, their Encounter series, that's what I have. That's what I started out with. The line that comes spooled on it is absolute garbage. You're going to get so frustrated trying to cast that thing. The line does not shoot out the guides no matter how hard you fight it, and it made me want to quit within just the first week of trying to cast. I watched some videos online, and I heard multiple people from multiple sources say the same thing. Like, if you're going to spend money on anything, spend the money on the line. As soon as I upgraded to a nice fly line, it instantly improved my casting. And so, yeah, the performance, the way the weight distribution, the taper on the end, that weight forwarded technology I was talking about earlier, the coating, the material that the line's made of, that's all going to affect the way it shoots out the rod. Um, yeah, it's a big deal. So I use a line by a company called Cortland. It's actually Flip Pallet's signature line. Flip Pallet is one of the godfathers in fly fishing. He is one of our
That was at
heroes.
least $30 extra just for having
Right.
his name on it.
Yeah. Well, you have to talk to Flip. We'll probably owe him some money. But yeah, no, Flip Pallet is a god among insects in the Everglades in Florida. And he's one that really, really boosted the sport of fly fishing in saltwater coastal wetlands. If you get a chance, check Flip Pallet out on YouTube. That dude is he's been around for a long time.
Now he's gonna owe me money for that shameless plug.
Yeah, we're even. We're even. Yeah, no, we're even. But yeah, I think that it's difficult. So, for anybody who's interested in getting into fly fishing, and I feel like I'm back around and about just what you can go out and do in Louisiana right now. There are, I think, every company out there in fly fishing has their own entry level kit. It's going to come with a rod, a reel. Most of them are pre-spooled at line. If you spend $200 on an Orvis rod and reel, you're going to end up spending $80, give or take, to upgrade the line. So you're in that $300 range already. There's a company called Redington They make a couple entry level kits that actually come pre-spooled at really good premium line, but you're still going to spend $300. So there's something about that $300 to $400 range that I don't, unless you're buying used, which I actually don't think is a problem. I think there's a lot of great deals on Facebook and eBay to buy used rods. Just do your research, pay attention to what you're getting into, what you're buying. There is some science behind matching the size of your reel to the appropriate action rod. Manufacturers are going to pay attention to weight distribution, balance, and all that stuff. Now you can break those rules. I just encourage new people and beginners learn the rules before you break them. So there are guys like Kelly Gallup I've mentioned a few times now. He will overspool his rod to give it a little faster action or a little more power on his forward cast. That is something to do. So there are rules that can be broken, but I would say don't break the rules until you learn them.
Right.
But
We also
no,
have in New Orleans, like talking about getting into fly fishing. We have the let's see. Frank was saying that there's a local club in New
yeah,
Orleans for fly fishing. I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure that's a common thing
yeah.
in a lot of places, especially where fly fishing is more common um, north of here, anywhere north of here, because
Yeah,
there's really isn't any
I haven't
south
reached
here.
out to the New Orleans Fly Fishing Club. I know they're here. I started.
Slacker,
What's that?
slacker.
Oh, I started looking into them before we moved to South Dakota. Now that I'm back, I'm keen to look them up because I think they do like fly tying sessions. They also do fly casting sessions, and they'll teach anybody who wants to learn, kids, adults. Um, Something else for people to consider: fly fishing, fly casting is one of the easiest types of fishing to teach kids. I have found trying to teach people how to fly cast that kids are actually infinitely easier to teach than adults are. Um,
Because we don't want to hear it.
well, I think adults don't have the patience, which is something I meant to say earlier. When we watch that beautiful cast on a YouTube video, somebody standing in that knee high water in Montana, they make it look so lovely and so elegant, and we don't realize that that's actually there's about 15 things going on simultaneously and in order to make that happen. And for adults, that gets really, really frustrating. But for some reason, kids have a better time at just simplifying it and making it work. But I did want to mention, like, if you're in Louisiana and you're wanting to get into fly fishing, what would you want to shop for? What type of rod, what size, what weight, and what would your target species? Well, again, we've already said that anything that swims can be caught with a fly rod. Um, so if you're going for bass, largemouth bass, um, we have different weights and rods. So the most popular rod that people start on is a 5 weight. They go all the way down to like a 3 or maybe even a 2 weight, but I think 3 weight is the most common small. And then in saltwater, you're fishing with a 9 to 11 weight rods. I think they make up to a 12. So for me, I got started with a 5 and a 9, and my thought process behind that was that my 5 weight, I'd be able to target like bluegill or smaller bass, and then my 9 weight would be designated with a saltwater reel for redfish or larger largemouth bass. If we know that we're going into an area like, for example, a stock pond where we know we're going to land into some 3 or 4 pounders or something like that. Um, but yeah, so that's where I start. And if you had to pick one rod in South Louisiana just to get started, I think I would recommend a 7 or an 8 weight. I think that's going to be the best middle ground.
Except, what's the price differences on the weight rods? Are they
Most of what I'm talking about, the price difference is going to be minimal. And so, like Redington, their starter kits, they're going to label it like trout, bass. Your trout rod's going to be your 5 weight. A bass is probably going to be a 7 weight. And then they'll do a saltwater rig, which is going to be your 9 weight or a 10 weight. Um, and so just heavier action rods, faster action rods. Heavier doesn't necessarily mean the action's going to be faster. Um, but yeah,
hold on.
go ahead.
Frank, when you type it in the comments, dude, I get text messages from him all the time. Try and read that. Like I know what he's trying to say. They do a casting clinic on EA month and
Teeing.
teeing twice a month.
I'm assuming that's tying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's probably once a month. I love you, Frank.
Yeah. Yeah. So they tee and they tie.
And they tie. Do they drink tea while they tie?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that'd be nice. But yeah, if anybody's interested in getting into fly fishing here, again,
Call
there-
Dean at 504-555.
probably the most common I hear guys shooting for are perch, brim, whatever you want to call it, bluegill, bass, and redfish, and that's going to be your classic freshwater, saltwater. I've never heard of anybody catching catfish with a fly rod. I think it can be done.
Well, catfish are usually you need bait. I mean, I've caught catfish on a top water one time.
Right.
Surprised the heck out of me. But catfish is usually more they hunt more by smell than
Right.
than sight. So
Okay, yeah, I don't know how you would do it. I know from running jug lines with you, I remember learning that they come up from the bottom to feed at night. And so I wonder if maybe if you were to try to catch a catfish with a fly rod, because something I'm just now getting into learning is more about the sinking fly fishing. So they're actually bobbers in fly fishing.
really,
They don't call them bobbers; they call them strike indicators.
excuse me. Well, I don't call them bobbers either. I just call them a cork.
Right. Well, they call them strike indicators, and they are technically different.
Do they light
because
up?
they're well, I don't know if they light up.
Well, then they're not a strike indicator. Tell me to
they're
shut up.
they're very, very, very light. They're like little air pockets, and so, but they serve the same thing. They serve as a bobber.
Interesting.
And if you have a sinking fly, I actually don't know how they do it. I don't know if they cast it out and then let it sink beneath the strike indicator. I know just from the mechanics of casting, you can't just back cast that out the water and cast it forward. What Kelly told me, Kelly Gallup, when you're dealing with sinking lines, is you do what's called a roll cast first. So you pull your line up to the surface, you roll it on top. And so you're basically rolling this line out. And then as soon as it hits the top water, then you lift and cast. And when it's done well, it's actually really beautiful. So you pull, roll, cast, and then cast. And it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's a lot. I'm talking with my hands, I know, but I don't know how to.
I'm gonna go back to Zepco, man. This is all getting a little too confusing.
Yeah. Oh, so let me simplify it for people. It can go in the woods. There's
I think the first thing would be just same with conventional fishing.
right.
If you're gonna get somebody into it, first of all, start with perch or
Right.
bluegill or wherever. Let me preface this by saying, anybody up north that has yellow perch, that is not what we're talking about. We call every panfish other than a sockeye, which is crappie. We call it a perch. I'm talking bluegill, shell crackers, lake runners. Those two are the same thing. All of those things, anything that's a panfish that's not a crappie, we call it a perch. So there you go. So yeah, perch jerking. So like if I'm gonna get a kid into it,
That's the best way to
it's
go.
the best way to do it because
Yeah.
you're gonna get more bites. There's more action. It's really simple. You put a worm on the bottom of a hook,
And you
throw
can
out
do
there
it
with a cork.
anywhere and
Yeah,
everywhere.
just about. So
Yeah.
I would say the same thing would be with fly fishing. You would want to do the same thing because you're gonna get more bites with it. You don't have to cast it out as far because you're gonna be most of the time they're right
Right.
along the bank. So um
Yeah. So to make it simple, okay, in fly fishing, you have wet flies, dry flies, nymphs, and this and that and that and this and that. It
Popper.
doesn't have to be that complicated.
Start with a popper.
You don't even have to start with a popper.
I like
Poppers are a
poppers.
lot of fun for bass. They're a lot of fun for bass. In fact, every bass I've caught so far. No, that's not true. All but one of the bass that I've caught on a fly rod were on poppers. They're a ton of fun. They're easy to cast, and they also help you fight the wind a little bit, and they make a good bit of motion. If you're wanting to learn how to fly fish in South Louisiana, and you want it as simple as possible, just to get your foot in the door, to learn the basic fundamentals that build on later, you start with, I would recommend what everybody else recommends, a 5-weight rod, a 9-foot 5-weight rod with the appropriate corresponding reel and fly line. So 5-weight reel, 5-weight line. And then I would start the same way I was taught. The man who taught me first, he might even be in that comment section. I don't remember his name. I know his name was Dave. Anyways, so when you watch fly fishing videos, if you don't know what you're looking at, you see these guys doing this action when they're casting. So as the rod goes back, they're yanking down. And as the rod comes forward, they're yanking forward. And that's called a double haul. When they pull that line, it's the rod to bend even further with a more aggressive cast. And they do the same thing coming. And so bending the rod forward, they're pulling down at the same time the line. It causes it to bend. You don't have to work any or all of that. What it did to me was he cast out, I don't know, 20 maybe, had me just pinch that line underneath the handle with my finger. And all I did was practicing that same length over and over. And that length, you can catch perch in the water. Especially since you're hugging the bank most of the time we're fishing for perch. And so you don't have to worry about all that stuff. You just get a minimal amount of line out, just practicing timing, preferably out of the wind. And then other things. It's a little more complicated, but it's really not much more complicated than that. You just pick a fixed amount of line. You're not trying to, and then as you get comfortable with that, and you get you let a little bit of line out. Turn that 20, 22 feet, and then practice, get the, and then 30. And the next thing you know, you're shooting 50, 60 feet of line out there, which is what I practice with. I usually try to get to about, I'm guessing probably about 50 feet. But I can't think of a single time where I've actually needed to catch 50 feet, because you're 50 feet, you got another 9 later in front of that. You're talking darn near 60 feet away. Like, yeah, there are occasions where that's necessary, but I haven't been in that position yet needed to cast that much.
If you hook yourself in the neck.
What are numbers?
Uh,
I never hooked myself in the back of the neck. I've hooked myself in the back countless times. So that's a danger of
You're just not trying hard enough.
Yeah, the long distance casting. I've seen pictures of guys with flies in their ear, in the back of their neck, the back of their scalp, their eyebrows from a back cast. Every time that's happened to me, it's because I was trying to cast too much line on a windy day. So what happens is, if I'm so that double haul technique I was talking about, that's a great technique for fighting wind up to a certain degree. But if you've got 50, 45, 50 feet of line you're throwing behind you in that back cast, and you're throwing it forward, as I'm going back and starting my return forward cast, the wind will shift the direction of that fly, and then pop right in the back. And I remember teaching a friend from church, my very first time really hanging out with this guy. I didn't really know him that well at the time. And I was telling him, I said, man, when you're casting, be careful to do exactly what I just did. And it sunk in my back. And this guy, who I barely knew his last name at this point, is undressing me to peel this hook out of my back with a set of pliers. That was
the
a
good
great
thing is the
way to get
hooks
to know.
aren't very big in fly fishing, right? I mean,
Well, no, typically it varies, just like in conventional fishing. In saltwater fishing, you're going to use some big hooks, just like you do in normal. Now, I just was listening to Orvis podcast recently. A lot of new technology. They're not fishing with as big of hooks nowadays, but like in your trout, in your northern rivers, yeah, you're going to be fishing anywhere from like a number 12 all the way up to like a 22 hook, which is just so tiny. I'm not even sure what you catch other than a mosquito. All the hooks that I fish with down here on bass, and I don't have a rhyme or reason, it's just what I'm comfortable with, are between a size 8 and a 12. I would say that's about the hook size. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but
well, we looked it up the other day because we were talking about it. So
right.
it goes from the higher the number, the thinner it is,
The
until
smaller
it
the hook,
gets
yeah.
to the aughts.
Right.
And then once it gets to a certain size, then you're going to be like the 1/0, the 2/0, and then the higher the number, the thicker it gets. When you're
Right.
talking about this ought,
Right.
whatever that
Yeah.
means. Why they do that, I have no
So in
idea.
saltwater, it's not uncommon to see guys fly fishing with a size 3, size 4 hook, which is to me is just gargantuan.
So how do
Uh,
they? I mean, the bigger the hook, isn't it going to sink? Can you still have a floating or a dry fly with that big of a
yeah,
hook?
you can have. I think most guys who are in saltwater fishing, again, I don't have a lot of experience with this. They're fishing with streamers, so wet flies that sink.
Mm,
And then again, they let it sink to the depth they want it to go, and then when they start stripping, which is what we refer to as reeling it in, because you're not actually reeling, you're pulling the
right.
line back in. That's called stripping. When they start stripping, that fly is going to maintain that. Yeah, when they start stripping, there's
Yeah,
usually
they
yellow
are.
jackets around. No,
Start stripping out
yeah.
on the
When they
skiff.
start stripping on the skiff, they're maintaining that depth of that fly, and so like they're not too unlike muskie and pike. Muskie and pike flies can be 8 to 12 inches long, and they're just these huge flies, and they're meant to emulate kind of like what we see trash fish, like these mullets around here. Um, super heavy flies, like really heavy flies, and it's something that I don't know. I might be getting too far ahead of myself trying to do that now because it's a whole different style of casting. Like, when you're learning a basic 5 weight, just a basic cast with a floating fly line, you have to relearn all that all over again when you start dealing with sinking lines and heavy flies, because the size of your hook and the weight of your fly and the air drag of that fly, that has to correlate with the size and diameter and the stiffness of your leader and your line. Because okay, I'm going into this stock pond where I know there's going to be some 4 pound bass. And so old school me, I know that I want this size hook for that or this size fly for that. Well, that might not correspond with the size leader and fly line I have. And so my casting is going to be garbage. If I try to put a fly too big for my corresponding leader and line, when I go to cast, that thing is going to hit off the water. And that's if I can cast it to begin with without popping it on off on my back cast. Same thing up north. If you're using a fly that's way too small for the corresponding leader and line you have, you're going to go do your forward cast and it's just all going to crumple up and fall apart in the water. And so it's a lot, but it doesn't have to be that complicated starting out.
Speaking of flies, there's one flying. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but it is annoying the crap out of me. All right, dude. Well, so in the last few minutes, let's switch gears for a minute.
I did want to just mention some good resources very quickly for people who might be interested in getting
How
into.
selfish of me. Let's do all the things that you want to do.
Just very quickly, just shoot out. If you're wanting to get into fly fishing,
Call Dean at
call
504
Dean at
555.
50455. Yeah. No, the Orvis podcast is a great, great resource. Tom Rosenbauer with Orvis is a great resource for you to actually email questions. Sometimes he'll select your questions to read on the podcast. Mad River Outfitters, the YouTube channel that's excellent. They've got just series of videos that literally walk you through every single element of the cast. And Brian with Mad River Outfitters has just been so good at removing the misconceptions, removing the intimidation and the confusion, and just sticking with brass tacks. He does a much, much better job than what I'm doing tonight. Um, and yeah, so I would say that's just a couple resources right off the top of my head. There are others, many, many others on YouTube, but those are my go-to. Anytime I need to try to figure out what knot should I tie here, what size fly should I use with this line, I always go to Mad River first. Um, they're also a great company that you can call on the phone. If you can't find the information online, you can call them and they help out, and it's awesome. But the reason it's important for me to mention that is that uh, one of the things that we need very, very badly in South Louisiana, and it's starting, but we're still not there yet. If there's any chance for us to get into fly fishing here, we got to have some kind of community around it. And because that's so small, few and far between, most of us need resources outside of the state. So, for example, Mad River Outfitters, being able to call them and talk to them And then maybe this New Orleans Fly Fishing Club. I'm definitely going to look into them. But yeah, a lot of resources out there to help people remove the intimidation and kind of guide them into what they need to do.
And if you're gonna check out all those things, make sure you finish binging all of my content first.
Right.
And speaking of knots, you said what knots to tie. Well, there is a app. Do you still have that app?
I do. What not to do?
What not to do. It's from Colombia. I didn't realize that until I just read it. But yeah, you can download it. It's free. What not to do. And it's got all kind of knots for fishing, camping, sailing, a little star. I don't know what that. Oh, it's our favorites. I didn't add any favorites. But yeah, check that out. Download it. Helps out the bind. But all right, yeah. So let's just loosen things up a bit. Bigfoot. I get this from Alex. He asked me this question when I was on his podcast, but I want to pass this on to you. Bigfoot. Does he exist?
Mm. I can't speak to that.
No, never seen him.
I've never seen it. No.
Do you think it's possible that something's been chalking around up there in the northwest?
No.
No, no, not at all. Not a believer. This man is not a believer.
I'm not a believer.
I'm giving Alex your phone number. He's gonna have some words for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bigfoot.
Yeah. I've been wrong before. Just
You're gonna be up there.
not
You're
over
gonna take a trip to Washington, or maybe even Alaska. And you're gonna be out there doing your little fly fishing thing, just minding your own business, trying to catch a big salmon or a sea trout, and out comes this huge, gargantuan, gorilla-looking guy, and he's probably just gonna ask you for a cool one, and he's probably gonna stick his head out from beside the trees, like, "Hey, man, you're doing that all wrong."
Yeah. Catch the line over there.
My people have been here for centuries. You're doing it all wrong.
Speaking of Alaska
Ooh.
and Bigfoot, where is your bucket list place to fish? Limited to the US.
Limited to the US?
Limited
In the
to the
US.
US.
Oh.
Because Alaska is up there for me, but I don't know if it would be my number one.
I don't know.
It's
So
top 3 for sure.
Florida is one of the things, but that's so accessible to me though. So I don't know if I
Right.
want to use that as my one because they have there's a lot of species in Florida that I haven't caught yet. The snook for salt water. You have the peacock bass, which is actually from South America,
Mhm.
Central South America, and then also the clown knife fish, which is also I think an invasive species of Florida. I mean, we have a lot of invasive species. Florida has a ton, but I don't know, man, because I'm more of I mean, I like bass fishing, but I'm more of an inshore saltwater at heart. Love doing that. Um, Man, I really don't know. That's a good question. What was yours? What you got on your mind?
Oh man. Number 1 spot is a competing affection for either like a classic Montana.
And we're talking fly fishing for you right now.
I'm talking fly fishing.
Yeah, we're talking fly fishing.
Yeah. Which, by the way, that's really the only fishing I do now currently. Vinny's going to be getting me on a bait caster soon. I would love to fish either southern Montana or northern Wyoming. That would be one contender for number 1. The other is I really, really want to experience in fly fishing, upstate New York. The Battenkill River or the Catskills or something like that, just somewhere between New York and New Hampshire, Vermont, like just that classic.
What species are you aiming for?
The biting ones.
So no
it's
particular
not about a
species,
species.
It's
The
location.
purely location. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Somebody asked Tom Rosenbauer at Orvis. He asked, he might ask all the guys he fishes with, like, why does trout capture the imagination of so many fly anglers? Like, why did the trout seem more attractive? I think for some people it's because they're probably one of the most difficult species to catch. But I don't know if that's the case for most people. It may be. I think there's a lot of people who are just very challenge oriented with fishing. That's not me. For me, the reason why trout attract me is because of the where they live.
Right.
Trout live in beautiful, beautiful places, remote, pristine, beautiful places. Um, and yeah, so that's what it is for me. I have said for a couple of years now, and I'll continue to say, fly fishing is the most fun you can have not catching fish. And I feel like a day standing out on the Madison River in Montana or in the Battenkill in New York, I just don't see how that day could fail. Like you just if you're out there in the water casting, you're winning. And if you bring home a trout, great. Um, even though they catch and release, but
Into a cooler.
into a cooler. Yeah.
Now, I mean, Alaska would be awesome. And again, I guess it wouldn't matter what species for me either. It would just be the scenery because I don't even know what lakes, in the country have the big bass and the whole thing because I was never, I'm just getting into the whole bass
Right.
fishing world. I went to the Bassmaster Classic recently, which we talked about in the last podcast with Alex, and it's a whole different world than I'm used to. So I guess that isn't really that big a deal, catching, a lake with, tons of monster bass. I'm looking at the scenery too. So
Right.
like I want to go to like Yellowstone. Do they even have water in Yellowstone? I'm sure they do. I'm just thinking of like
Oh yeah.
beautiful national parks,
Yeah.
that you can go to. Uh yeah, man, just places I've never seen before. I mean Alaska's gotta be beautiful, but then I gotta get on a plane. And I'm not big about getting on planes, so I'm have to get over that or I'll never see Alaska.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
I don't want to. Yeah, if we had a part two of this at some point, and I know you'll probably cover this in future podcasts, so we don't certainly have to squeeze this. Um, there is something, and we literally have like what 2 minutes,
Yeah.
so um, there is something
Nobody listens to this anyway. You got time.
unique about in the fly fishing world a connection to conservation, and I'll just leave that at that. That's something that I also identify with fly fishing is a desire for conservation. And I think that ties into that the intentionality of fly fishing where you have to kind of slow down because this is a great closing remark. It's not the most efficient way. Everything today in fishing, get to the fish faster, find them more efficiently, fish more efficiently. Like we're making it more streamlined to get on and to harvest fish as efficiently as possible. And what that does um, economically and to the fisheries and different regions around the world, it does something. I won't say it tonight, good or bad, but it does something, and I'd love to talk about that in the future. And
Yeah, we're gonna have to
um,
get well with your contacts and stuff like that. We'll get somebody
right,
who knows a little bit more about what they're talking about. I mean, I just wanted tonight to
oh yeah,
get
just be
into
loose,
the allure of
right,
fly fishing. But yeah, we'll get in touch with somebody who's like their lifelong thing. And that guy who does the charters with
yeah,
redfish and fly. I mean, that would be actually two different episodes, probably. Get some guy up north that likes to fly fish and streams and then get the guy who likes to fly fish for
right.
reds. But anyway, guys, that's gonna words get tough sometimes when I try and speak a little too fast. But that's pretty much gonna wrap this one up. Every Tuesday and or Wednesday, we do these live recordings of the podcast here on YouTube. Just depends on my work schedule. So if you're listening to it on podcast, that's where you can watch it live. If you're watching it live and you missed a podcast or two, you can check it out wherever you get your podcast, Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those good things. And yeah, it was a good time as usual. Thank you for coming out, Dean. Good
Thank
old
you for having
buddy.
me.
Glad to have you back, man.
Right on.
From that hell of South Dakota back to the promised land down here
From
in
the
Southeast
cold.
Louisiana. So, all right, guys. Peace out. Oh, I got to press the button first. You're still here.